Are we sitting comfortably? Are the lights turned down low, and the shadows lengthening in the room? Are the curtains closed, and are the doors locked? Good. Then let us begin. Langenhoe is situated on a slight rise above bleak marshlands near Mersey Island in Essex. It is now a rather lonely graveyard, hidden by tall trees, in which there is a certain strange, creepy, even malevolent feel. The church to which this graveyard belonged was built in the 14th century, damaged by an earthquake in 1884, demolished in 1962, and had a reputation for being haunted. The Haunting of Langenhoe. Local legends tell of a lady in black who walked around the church at night, and an account of two sisters in 1908 who reported seeing the figure of a nun who moved slowly along the path before disappearing through the north wall at the west end of the church. The Reverend Ernest Merriweather became the rector of Langenhoe in early 1937, and during his time there he recorded many odd incidents at the church in his diary. On the 20th of September 1937, he was alone at the church when the west door slammed shut with an almighty crash, although there was no wind. It is said that the whole church shook. Many other entries record the movement of objects and the sound of thudding noises which were heard coming from the vestry. On the 28th of September 1950, while he was in the vestry, the Reverend Merriweather heard a young woman singing. It was some form of plain song, he thought. It seemed to be coming from the west end of the church. And then there was the sound of heavy footsteps walking up the aisle. When he entered the church from the vestry, all the sounds ceased, and he saw that the church was completely empty. A week later, he arrived at the church to find two workmen crouched by the west door whilst looking through the keyhole. Singing was heard coming from the empty church. All three of them went into the church, and although they searched thoroughly, it was again empty. Christmas Eve 1950, and Reverend Merriweather was walking up the nave towards the chancel when the apparition of a man, possibly dressed in a tweed suit, glided across the nave and disappeared into the pulpit. Also, during Sunday services, he saw a woman in late medieval or Tudor dress cross the west end of the church and then vanish through a wall there. Once, when practicing at the organ, he felt as though he was being watched from behind, and turning, he saw the figure of a woman in a modern cream dress looking at him for a second, before vanishing. In 1959, Reverend Ernest Merriweather retired, and Langenhoe was closed. In 1962, the damaged church was demolished. My friend John Denning, himself a reverend of the Church of England, spent time investigating at both Langenhoe and Borley in the 1940s and the 1950s. His second book, The Restless Spirits of Langenhoe, was published in 2000, and this documents his researches into the haunting of the church and his investigations there. Incidentally, I was honoured to be asked to write the foreword for this volume. Eddie Brazil records his experience at Langenhoe in an article from 2015, where he writes that during a visit to Langenhoe, as he and his wife made their way amongst the gravestones, they were both conscious of experiencing a strange, heady giddiness, as though some force was sapping their energy. His wife felt this unpleasant sensation most, and became nauseous to the point of having to return to the car. Eddie states that there was a brooding oppressiveness gathering within the churchyard, something he called wholly unpleasant. Deciding to leave, he closed the gate behind him and states that he was relieved to be once more outside the churchyard and in the lane. My visit to Langenhoe. I visited Langenhoe in 1977 or 1978, soon after getting my first motorcycle and gaining a certain amount of freedom to visit where I wished. The graveyard was an unkempt, overgrown, deserted place, and somewhat dangerous underfoot, I was there on a summer's afternoon. It was warm and still. Birds were singing, and insects were buzzing around. And yet, there was a strange coldness amongst those headstones poking out from the overgrown grass. There was an undeniable feeling of being watched from the edge of the graveyard that intensified the longer I stayed there. I still remember that the hairs on the back of my neck were rising, and of getting goosebumps. There was at least one presence there, definitely a man, who was not friendly towards interlopers like me, and who, I felt, was doing his best to intimidate me to leave. After a short while in that overwhelmingly hostile environment, I obliged him and departed.